Hello and welcome back to Bookish and welcome to my Saturday Hodgepodge. This week I'm going to be going over my TransGirlApril TBR as well as the rest of my TBR for April, wrapping up what I read in March as best I can, and then having a discussion about the case for diverse reading, a topic I think I've covered before. Okay, so if you don't know, April has been declared TransGirlApril by Kevvie over the channel Say Kevvie. She and Willow from the channel Books and Bow are hosting TransGirlApril and inviting us all to read works by trans and non-binary authors this month to show support for the trans community and the LGBTQ community as well. And I really saw this as a great opportunity to do exactly that and to kind of add my voice to the voice of the other people involved in TransGirlApril to speak out against the fascism we see growing in its efforts to marginalize and attack and vilify members of the trans community. As I said in a video last week, there is nothing new about this. This is, fascism 101. Rally the majority, focus their fear, their anxiety on a small minority of people who can't possibly defend themselves, and then use that to build political momentum. There's no doubt in my mind that's exactly what the Republican Party is doing right now, and it is just inherently wrong. Trans rights are simply human rights. All the trans, non-binary, any community you can think of want is the right to live their life free, to have access to the health care they need, live their life free of the threats of violence and marginalization and the taking away of rights. And what we see our governments doing right now, at the state level right now, is attacking those very human rights of trans people. And there's nothing American about that. There's nothing humane about that. It is fascism, pure and simple. So, for TransGirlApril, Kevvie came up with this kind of spreadsheet thing. It's not exactly a bingo card, which I'll put up over here, which encourages us to try to read a work by a trans man, by a trans woman, by non-binary authors, to read works of fiction, non-fiction, and genre fiction. I'm really bad at things like this, but I think I've done a fairly good job with my 5 for sure books I'm going to read for TransGirlApril. So the first book I'm going to read for TransGirlApril is An Unkindness of Ghosts by River Solomon, who identifies as non-binary, and this book, I believe, is a work of Afrofuturism, which kind of sets the world of slavery in the future on a ship traveling through outer space. And I honestly don't know any more about it than that, but it really seemed like a great opportunity to read something by River Solomon, who I've heard of their other book. Can't remember the title of it right now, and I thought about reading that one, but this one really caught my eye. The second book I want to make sure I read this month is Daryl by Jackie Ess. I believe Jackie Ess identifies as trans, and Daryl is a book which I've seen mentioned about 1 million times over the channel Gunpowder Fiction and Plot, which is Scott's channel, and then on the channel The Book Hunt, which is Nell's channel. And I've been promising to read this book for more than a year, and this is a great opportunity for me to read it. It is supposed to be funny, kind of also in its own way poignant and thought-provoking, and a little more than a little bit naughty, so looking forward to that. One of the group reads for TransGirlApril is Felix Ever After by Kacen Callender. I had this on audiobook. I'm going to listen to as a part of the group read, and hopefully remember to check in on the Discord to participate in that discussion. But looking forward to this. I've heard nothing but lovely things about this, and this is one of those books, because I believe it is a YA book that we find frequently being banned here in the United States. I'm also going to read Trans Like Me, a collection of essays by C.N. Lester, who I believe identifies as non-binary. This is just their kind of writings about the experience of being a trans person. And so I'm kind of looking forward to that. Again, I don't know a lot about it. And then the fifth book I have on my list is Don't Call Us Dead by Danez Smitth, a book of poetry, which I heard about several years ago and have been promising to read. And again, this kind of just works out perfectly for me in reading that book this month. I'm also, though, this month reading the first half of Don Quixote with Jo Renee from Jo Renee Reads channel. She and I are going to buddy read this over the course of the entire month. This is one of those books I basically said was a classic I'd never read, and then more or less was convinced to at least to attempt to read the first half, so I'll be doing that as well this month. I don't think I'm on the list for Book 2 prize judging. If I am, things will change. The other thing I wanted to talk about do here then is just kind of wrap up my reading for March. There are all kinds of Book 2 reading events in March. I really only participated intentionally in two. The first is called Her Storyathon. Since March is Women's History Month, Her Storyathon celebrates women's history, and I chose to read a book that I've had for a while, The Hemingses of Monticello by historian Annette Gordon-Reed, which basically tells the story of the Hemings family, who were enslaved people owned by Thomas Jefferson, and among that family was Sally Hemings, the woman who Jefferson fathered several children with after his wife died. It is an incredibly engrossing, dense, complicated work of history. It inspired my video about, is history art or science? Because to me this is a work of art in which we see the author presenting the truth as she believes it to be based on the evidence she's been able to gather. And I really think it's a very good, very important work of history that tells us a lot about Jefferson, tells us a lot about the situation of slavery in the American South, but primarily Virginia around the time of the American Revolution and immediately after that, and kind of gives us glimpses into the life, the hopes, the desires, the commitment to protecting their families of enslaved black people in the United States of America. Just a really great work of history. By the way, Her Storyathon is hosted by Charlotte from Coiny Reads and, I forgot the other, Brittany from Literarily Smitten. Host Her Storyathon. I'll leave links to their channels down below. I don't know if you can tell, the camera angle will be different. One of my books slid off and hit the tripod. So as I was saying, the other readathon I participated in March is March Mystery Madness. Before I went on my vacation to Scotland, which you're probably tired of me hearing me talk about already, I read one mystery, Maigret mystery by Georges Simenon, which I liked a lot. I am currently reading, today is March the 31st, and I hope to finish up a second Georges Simenon Maigret novel, and this one's Maigret and the Ghost. I just love these. They're short, they're 150 pages. They're set in France, even though I believe our detective is Belgian. They are incredibly well written, and really, all the ones I've read have been really interesting and satisfying. I also finished The Mysterious Affair at Styles, which is a Hercule Poirot mystery by Agatha Christie, which, I found to be a bit over complicated without really giving the reader all the clues necessary to solve the mystery, but enjoyable, and Poirot is an interesting and enjoyable character, and as is true with most Christie mysteries, the mystery is handled fairly deftly. I do wish that we weren't placed in the role of Hastings and kind of kept in the dark about lots of things. I kind of prefer my mysteries where I have a chance to figure them out. And then the fourth book I read from March Mystery Madness was The City Primeval by Elmore Leonard. It's also called High Noon in Detroit. This involves a psychotic killer, the death of a really unpopular judge, the kind of inward struggle, psychological struggles of a police detective, the Detroit police force, and if you've ever read Elmore Leonard, it's full of very memorable, quirky fairly unique characters, and I enjoyed it. It's not, I don't think, anywhere near Leonard's best, but it was really, really enjoyable. So that, along with the 3 BookTube Prize books I read in March, comes out to something like, I think, 7 or 8 books maybe, which is about my normal, which I'm pretty happy with considering I was gone for 10 days and pretty exhausted for 2 days after I got back from my trip. I will be talking about and have a video out next week in which I rank and kind of give a brief review of my BookTube Prize books. I read nonfiction group A, I'll go ahead and tell you that, and then have that video out sometime next week. The other thing I want to talk about here is to once again make the case for diverse reading, and to kind of talk about, I think, the way in which sometimes diverse reading is seen here on BookTube. There are any number of people who, whenever they see somebody participating, somebody like me participating in, reading events designed to increase diverse reading, designed to get people to read books by, marginalized authors, or by authors whose books appear in English only in translation, or by authors from places where normally we might, countries we ordinarily might not see authors from. Every time that happens, and every time I post a video like that, I am accused simply of virtue signaling, and of being a checkbox reader, and not reading to try to find the best books, but reading to fill out some kind of a list. And every time that happens, I have to tell you that it is offensive to be lumped in or be considered in that way. One of the interesting things I think about it is when people say, oh, people all with BookTube channels are always on their channel talking about all their diverse reading, like saying, look at me, I read diversely. Well, if I am reading diversely and I'm on my channel talking about the books I read, I mean, do they want me not to talk about the books I read when I read diversely? You see what I'm saying? If I have a BookTube channel where I talk about books, and in a month I read diversely, and I talk about those diverse books, then, well, what else am I supposed to do? That's my primary content. I read books, I talk about them on my channel. But I wanted to once again kind of make the case for diverse reading, using myself as an example. First of all, you should be able to tell that I'm not really a checkbox reader. If you look at the books that I read in March, only one of those books was by a person of color, Annette Gordon Reed's book, The Hemingses of Monticello. I read books by white men. I read books by white women. I read a book by a white woman whose whose racism is oftentimes evident in her books. So it's not that I never read books by white people, or by white men, or by white cis heterosexual men. I do. As a matter of fact, I have no idea of how many books by people of color or members of the LGBTQ plus community, or how many books in translation, or how many books from Asia or Africa or any other place. I have no idea how many of those books I read a year, because I literally don't keep track. But I do intentionally try to read more diversely. And because of that, I find that the BookTube themed reading months, which encourage diversity, work out really well, to get me to read more diversely. Now, hopefully I read more diversely all year long. Hopefully I read books by authors, LGBTQ plus authors all year long, and I think I do. Hopefully I read books by people of color all year long, and I think I do. But these months, like TransGirlApril, give me an opportunity to focus my reading on reading books by authors from those groups as a way of diversifying my reading. Now, to me, that kind of diversification of reading makes me happier. It makes my reading more fulfilling. And that's why I do it. Not so I can come on here and say, hey, look at me, I read diversely, but because I find it fulfilling. I have found great books by reading diversely. Books I never would have read before. Books I never would have come to. The Lost Children Archive, Loat is a great example. The Death of Vivek Oji, another great example. Cold Enough for Snow. These are books I probably never would have read if I weren't intentionally trying to read diversely. And those are some of the greatest books I've read in the last 5 or 6 years. So to me, the reward is I get to find more great books. I've seen it argued that and lots of people from all different groups oftentimes seem to gravitate towards books written by authors that are like them. And the justification for that is that they would say, well, those books speak to me naturally because I'm a member of this group. Those books speak to me, and these other books aren't written for me. I really think that is an unfortunate way to look and to think about why you read the way you read. We're all human beings, and books written by all kinds of authors and all kinds of backgrounds and all kinds of places should speak to all of us and give you some idea of how foolish I think that approach to reading is, or that justification for why people read authors from the group they belong to, is. I'll tell you something that I used to say all the time. I used to refuse to read books that were not written in the 20th century. My argument was that the authors who wrote books in the 19th, 18th century and before that, didn't speak to me because my experiences as a 20th century person were vastly different from their experiences. That they couldn't tell me anything about the world I lived in, that their books wouldn't speak to me because they lived in a world completely different from my own. Well, that meant that I read almost no classics that weren't 20th century classics. And think about all the books I missed out on. And are now going back and reading and thoroughly enjoying, because the truth of the matter is great books, great literature speak to us across those lines that divide us, and by reading them, those lines become blurred and diminished. Anyway, I'm not sure that all made sense, but there you go. There's Saturday Hodgepodge for this week, and I look forward to your comments in the comment section below, and as always, thank you for watching.